You're not a different person at night. Your brain is just tired.
Yeah.
Think about it. It's 2:80 a.m. You were staring at the ceiling, and suddenly you are completely convinced that you need to quit your job, move to a new city, and, I don't know, start a boutique coffee roastery.
Right. It's always something massive.
Exactly. You feel this surge of absolute certainty. But then your alarm goes off at 7 a.m., and the very thought of answering a single work email makes you want to hide under the covers.
The midnight motivation just totally vanishes.
It's entirely gone. That fearless midnight entrepreneur does not exist in the morning.
Sure.
So we are devoting today's deep dive exclusively to you and this exact phenomenon. We're exploring the hidden architecture of your daily energy.
It is such a universally maddening experience.
Right.
But the mechanics behind it are actually highly specific, and they're deeply biological.
So we're unpacking exactly why your evening brain feels like a completely different operating system than your morning brain. We'll look at how mental fatigue silently accumulates and how this directly impacts your confidence, your emotional regulation, and, that creeping dread that tends to settle in when the sun goes down.
To build this custom deep dive for you, we are synthesizing a really diverse, fascinating stack of source material today.
Yeah, we've got a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We are looking at clinical studies on depression and evening cortisol spikes, research out of Harvard on adolescent sleep and emotional dysregulation.
Which is wild, by the way.
Oh, it's fascinating. We also have chronobiology studies from Spain that measure resilience based on your internal clock, and even clinical protocols from rumination-focused cognitive behavioral therapy.
And we are weaving all of that heavy science together with a viral Reddit thread that perfectly, hilariously captures this exact feeling. Making life-changing plans at midnight, but chickening out by breakfast.
It's a perfect real-world anchor for all this data.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we want to understand why you fall apart or overthink at night, we really can't just look at the night itself.
No, you have to rewind.
Right, we have to look at what you were doing during the day to drain your tank. And it begins with the staggering volume of cognitive load you were carrying around.
The sheer math of it is kind of shocking.
Yeah, the sources note that the average person makes about 35,000 decisions every single day.
Which, that sounds like an impossible exaggeration until you actually break down the micromechanics of an average morning.
Wait, 35,000? That just feels made up.
I know, but think about the moment you wake up. The barrage begins instantly.
Okay, fair.
Do I hit snooze? Do I hit it once or twice? Which side of the bed do I get out on?
Right.
Do I check my phone immediately? Which app do I open first? What kind of coffee am I making? These are micro choices. But according to the strength model of self-control, making these choices doesn't just dictate the logistics of your day.
It does something to the brain, right?
Yeah, exactly. The act of choosing physically wears the brain down. It acts as a tax on your willpower and your cognitive energy.
So it creates this state that the psychological literature calls decision fatigue.
Yes, exactly.
I want to pause on that for a second because the metaphor I usually hear is that the brain is like a battery. But a battery implies a steady, passive drain.
Right, like a flashlight left on.
Exactly. But reading these sources, it feels much more like a computer CPU, right? Like decision fatigue isn't just your battery dying. It's like you have 35,000 browser tabs open in the background, secretly hoarding all your RAM.
That is a much more accurate way to visualize it, yeah. Every unmade decision, every variable you are weighing is an active background process.
Wow.
And Swarthmore professor Barry Schwartz explores this brilliantly in his concept of the paradox of choice. We culturally assume that having endless options equals ultimate freedom and happiness.
More is better.
Right. But Schwartz points out that an abundance of options actually paralyzes the brain rather than mobilizes it.
He uses that classic grocery store example, which I love. You walk into a pharmacy just to buy toothpaste.
A zero-effort errand, hypothetically.
Right. It should take 2 seconds. But there are 60 different kinds. You've got whitening, tartar control, sensitive teeth, baking soda, charcoal, enamel repair.
It's overwhelming.
Your brain suddenly has to process an avalanche of variables just to make an incredibly insignificant choice.
And studies by psychologists Shenhav and Buckner reveal what is actually happening in the brain during that toothpaste aisle paralysis.
What's going on in there?
Well, they found that the anxiety experienced during the decision-making process actively increases our self-doubt.
Really? Just from picking toothpaste?
Yeah, because when you are constantly evaluating overlapping options, your neural networks get stressed. Fast forward to the end of the day. When you are cognitively exhausted, your desperate, depleted brain simply opts for the safest choice.
Or just the default choice.
Exactly, not necessarily the best one. You literally no longer have the computational power to evaluate risk and reward.
Okay, I have to push back on this premise just a little bit, though, because evolutionarily speaking, this makes zero sense to me.
How so?
Well, you are telling me that standing in the toothpaste aisle, trying to pick between mint and charcoal, is draining the exact same cognitive RAM that I use to, say, negotiate my salary or decide whether to buy a house.
It sounds absurd, I know.
Shouldn't our brains have a tiered system?
Yeah.
Like survival decisions get the premium energy and low-stakes choices get processed for free.
It is a totally logical assumption, but what's fascinating here is that the brain's computational hardware doesn't actually work that way.
It doesn't.
No, it doesn't magically know the social or financial weight of a decision before it analyzes it. The mere act of resolving a variable, comparing, contrasting, predicting outcomes, and finalizing a choice requires cognitive fuel.
So the mechanism is exactly the same.
Yes. Now, a salary negotiation obviously takes more sustained energy over time than picking toothpaste. But the underlying mechanism of resolving that paradox of choice uses the same localized neural pathways.
It's all pulling from the same tank.
Precisely. It is a cumulative effect. By 7:00 p.m., you might find that deciding what movie to watch on a streaming platform feels so insurmountable that you just rewatch an old sitcom you've seen 50 times.
Oh my gosh, I do that constantly. The Office, every night.
Exactly. Your brain is just saying, I refuse to compute any new variables today.
Which perfectly explains why we seek out routines.
Yeah.
But wait, how does this computational burnout explain the midnight motivation?
Ah, right.
Because the Reddit thread we pulled from your sources, this is from the Explain Like I'm 5 subreddit, poses the ultimate question. The user asks, why at night when I'm trying to do things I feel so confident?
It's such a great question.
They say, like, I think about doing things, but when the time comes or when I wake up in the morning, I don't want to do it anymore, or I chicken out.
Yes, the classic night guy versus day guy phenomenon.
Yes. Someone in the comments actually quoted that old Jerry Seinfeld bit. That's day guy's problem. I'm night tea guy.
It's perfect.
We all know night guy. Night guy wants to learn French, get a six-pack, and write a novel all at 2 a.m. But day guy just wants to eat a bagel and survive.
Exactly.
So why is night guy so wildly confident if the brain's CPU is supposedly totally fried by the end of the day?
Well, the sources outline two primary psychological mechanisms for this, and they actually align perfectly with a fatigued brain.
Okay, what's mechanism one?
Mechanism one is all about the chemistry of imagination. Thinking about doing a difficult tasks like visualizing yourself running a marathon provides a very similar psychological reward and endorphin release in the brain as actually doing it.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah,
So you get the dopamine hit of the achievement without, like, putting on your running shoes?
precisely. You get the biochemical reward for zero caloric output.
That's amazing. And a little deceptive.
Very deceptive.
Yay.
But mechanism two is where decision fatigue really plays its part. We have to look at inhibition.
Okay, inhibition.
Inhibition is the cognitive act of holding yourself back. It is the voice that plays devil's advocate. It's the voice that rationally assesses the obstacles of a plan. The voice that says, hey, learning French is going to take 500 hours of studying, and you barely have time to do laundry.
Right, the reality check voice.
Exactly. And maintaining that inhibitory voice takes a tremendous amount of energy.
Oh, wow. So at 2 a.m., my brain is literally too tired to be realistic.
That is exactly it. The inhibitory networks in your prefrontal cortex are effectively offline. You lack the mental energy required to play the role of the rational critic to your own ideas.
That makes so much sense.
So you aren't actually more confident at night, you are just completely uninhibited because your brain is too exhausted to calculate the risks or the required effort.
So night guy isn't some bold visionary. Night guy is just a guy whose rational brakes have completely worn out.
That's a perfect way to put it. The brakes are gone.
And then morning comes. The alarm goes off. You've slept. Your cognitive RAM is cleared. And suddenly you have the energy to power that inhibitory voice again.
Yep. Day guy wakes up with a full tank of cognitive fuel.
And day guy looks at the plan to learn French and immediately calculates the commute time, the cost of the classes, and the fact that you already don't have enough free time.
Right, which paradoxically allows the brain to fully construct all the reasons why your late-night idea is difficult. The supreme confidence of the night was just an illusion born of fatigue.
That is simultaneously validating and incredibly frustrating.
I know, it really is.
Okay, so our daily choices drain our cognitive battery, our RAM, and that explains why our decision-making and our self-perception fluctuate so wildly.
Correct.
But if that's the action of the day draining the tank, what about the hardware itself? Like, how does our innate internal biological clock influence how quickly that tank drains in the first place?
That is the next big piece of the puzzle.
Because not everyone hits that wall at the exact same time, right?
No, they don't. To understand the hardware, we need to delve into a concept in chronobiology called circadian typology.
Circadian typology.
This categorizes individuals based on their natural endogenous biological rhythms. Your sources include a highly detailed study of 1,922 healthy Spanish adults that looked exactly at this.
Almost 2,000 people. That's a solid study.
It is. They mapped people's internal clocks and then cross-referenced that with their psychological resilience and optimism.
Wait, how exactly do you measure something as subjective as resilience in almost 2,000 people?
It's tricky, but they used a battery of very specific clinical scales. First, to find their biological clock, they used the Reduced Morningness-Eveningness questionnaire.
The RMEQ scale, right?
Exactly. This asks questions about what time you would naturally wake up if you had absolutely no obligations, when your energy naturally peaks, things like that.
So it figures out if you're a morning person or a night owl.
Right. Then they measured resilience using the Connor-Davidson resilience scale.
What does that scale look for specifically?
It measures how well you adapt to adversity. It asks individuals to rate their agreement with statements like, I can deal with whatever comes my way, or under pressure, I stay focused and think clearly.
Got it. So a highly resilient person scores really well on those.
Yes. And finally, they used the LOTR scale, which is the Life Orientation Test Revised. That measures dispositional optimism.
Basically, do you naturally expect good things to happen or bad things to happen?
Exactly. So they have these 3 data points.
Okay, so they map whether you are an early bird or a night owl, and they map whether you are resilient and optimistic. What did the cross-section show?
They classified the participants into 3 groups: morning type, neither type, and evening type. And the key finding was incredibly stark.
What was it?
Morning types consistently scored the highest in resilience and the highest in optimism. Evening types scored the lowest in both resilience and optimism.
Wait, I really need to process the implication of that.
It's a big one.
Are you saying that my overall outlook on life, like whether I am naturally optimistic or whether I crumble under pressure, might not be a fixed personality trait?
Yes.
It might just be a byproduct of whether my internal biological clock matches the time society forces me to wake up.
The data strongly suggests a deep connection there. And chronobiologists actually have a term for this. They call it social jet lag.
Social jet lag.
Yeah.
Wow.
Think about how our modern society is structured. Schools start at 8:00 a. Corporate jobs, government institutions, banks, they all operate roughly from 9 to 5.
Right.
This entire infrastructure was built exclusively for morning types. So if you are an evening type, your biological clock is in constant grinding desynchronization with the social clock.
You are fundamentally fighting your own biology just to participate in standard society.
Precisely.
So you're basically living in a state of permanent jet lag as if you were flying across 3 time zones every single day without ever getting on a plane.
That is exactly what it feels like to the body. And this chronic daily struggle leads to a phenomenon the researchers call dysfunctional reintegration.
Dysfunctional reintegration, what does that mean in plain English?
It means that when evening types face the daily, unrelenting adversity of fighting their own circadian rhythm, they often develop maladaptive strategies to cope with the exhaustion. This manifests clinically as lower measured resilience. It is so crucial to understand this point. It's not that evening types are inherently weak or naturally pessimistic.
Right.
It's that society's 9 to 5 structure inherently and systemically disadvantages them. It forces them into a state of chronic fatigue.
Which links right back to the CPU bottleneck and decision fatigue we just talked about.
Yes, exactly.
Because if you are an evening type, you are starting your day with, like, 20% of your RAM already consumed just by the sheer biological effort of being awake at an unnatural hour.
Spot on.
So your cognitive tank is going to drain infinitely faster than your morning type coworker.
That is the exact mechanism. And your sources also introduce a related physiological reality called diurnal mood variation.
Okay, what is that?
This is the clinical observation that human mood fluctuates significantly based purely on the time of day, completely independent of external environmental stimuli.
That is mind-blowing to me.
Isn't it?
Because I always assumed that if I felt depressed or anxious in the evening, it was because something bad happened at work or, I was worried about a specific problem.
We all think that. We look for a narrative to explain the feeling.
Right. But the biology suggests my mood can just plummet simply because the clock struck 8:00 p.m.
Yes. In psychiatric settings, they observe a phenomenon called morning depression, where symptoms are intensely worse right after waking up and improve as the day goes on.
Okay.
That is a hallmark of melancholic or somatic depression, but there is also a documented reversed form where the mood progressively and reliably worsens toward the evening.
And there's no external trigger for it.
None. What's critical to understand here is the metabolic activity in the brain.
Wait, what's happening to the metabolism?
Functional neuroimaging brain scans show that patients experiencing these variations exhibit decreased metabolic activity in the frontal and parietal cortex as the day progresses.
You're kidding.
No, the brain is literally altering how it metabolizes energy based on the time of day.
So that feeling of brain fog at night,
Yeah.
that's not just a metaphor.
No.
Your frontal cortex is literally metabolizing less energy. The power is physically being throttled.
Yes, and as that metabolic activity drops and the cognitive RAM clears out, the brain's structural ability to defend against negative thoughts begins to structurally fail.
Which brings us to the tipping point.
It does.
Because if social jet lag and decision fatigue are draining the tank all day, what exactly happens in the evening when those defenses finally completely collapse?
That's where things get complicated.
Yeah, how does this normal biological fatigue mutate into active spiraling negative thinking? Because that's what ruins people's evenings.
To map that transition, we have to look at a very compelling study from Harvard's DASH repository.
Okay.
This research focused on adolescent sleep and emotion dysregulation. They studied 40 adolescents, specifically tracking the relationship between their sleep patterns, their ability to regulate their emotions, and their risk for non-suicidal self-injury, or NSSI.
And as I read through that study, the detail that immediately jumped out to me was about the amount of sleep.
Right. It's very counterintuitive.
Yeah, because it wasn't necessarily the objective duration of sleep, like exactly how many minutes they were physically unconscious, that acted as the primary risk factor.
No, it wasn't.
It was the perceived insufficient sleep.
That is a vital distinction. The data show that the subjective feeling of not getting enough sleep fully mediated the risk of self-injury through a pathway of emotion dysregulation.
Okay, let's translate that clinical phrasing for a second. When they say it fully mediated the risk, does that mean the physical lack of sleep didn't matter as much as the psychological distress of feeling exhausted?
It means that sleep deprivation doesn't directly cause the severe behavioral outcome on its own.
Ah, I see.
Instead, sleep deprivation causes emotion dysregulation, which is an inability to manage intense feelings.
Right.
And that dysregulation is what leads to the severe outcomes. To understand why this happens, we have to look at the neurobiology of how the brain handles emotions.
Right, the relationship between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala.
Exactly. The prefrontal cortex, the PFC, sits right behind your forehead. It acts as the brain's top-down executive control center.
It's the logical part.
Yes, it is the logical, rational, forward-thinking part of the brain that keeps our impulses in check. The amygdala, located deeper in the brain, is the emotional, reactive threat detection center.
The alarm system.
Right. In a healthy, rested brain, the PFC constantly regulates the amygdala. If the amygdala panics, the PFC steps in and says, calm down, it's not a real threat.
It's like a responsible parent supervising a highly reactive toddler.
That's a great analogy. But when you are chronically tired, that PFC parent is exhausted. Furthermore, in the case of adolescence, the PFC is still undermyelinated, meaning its neural pathways aren't fully insulated and mature yet, so it operates less efficiently to begin with.
Oh, wow.
When fatigue hits, the PFC simply lacks the metabolic energy to effectively regulate the amygdala.
So the responsible parent literally falls asleep on the couch, and the reactive toddler is suddenly running the house with absolutely no supervision.
Precisely.
The rational brakes fail, and the emotional engine just redlines.
That is exactly what happens, and the clinical data we are reviewing highlights how incredibly serious the consequences of this dysregulation can be.
Yeah, it gets very heavy.
It does. Presenting this purely through the lens of the scientific findings. When the PFC fails to regulate emotion due to severe cognitive depletion, the risk for intense emotional distress, which can include self-injury and suicidal ideation, significantly increases. The research views these severe actions, in part, as maladaptive attempts to regulate or escape from overwhelming, unmanaged emotional pain when the brain's natural biological regulatory systems are completely compromised by fatigue.
It is a profound and honestly sobering reminder of how fiercely physical our mental health really is.
It really grounds it in biology.
We treat emotions like they are these ethereal philosophical things, but they are deeply tethered to how much metabolic energy our frontal cortex have access to.
Absolutely.
And the sources take this even deeper into the chemical side, specifically looking at the hormone cortisol.
Yes, this is a fascinating piece.
There's a study here from the Egyptian Journal of Neurology, Psychiatry, and Neurosurgery that looked at patients with major depressive disorder.
Right.
Now, I've always understood cortisol purely as the stress hormone that spikes when you are in danger, or the hormone that naturally wakes you up in the morning.
That's the common understanding,
But
yes.
this study found something entirely different happening in the evenings.
They found profound hyperactivity in what is called the HPA axis.
What is that?
The HPA axis, which stands for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, is the central command station for our body's stress response.
Okay.
In a neurotypical healthy system, your cortisol levels peak sharply in the early morning. This is biological. It literally helps you wake up and become alert.
Right, that makes sense. You need the stress hormone to get out of bed, not to go to bed.
Exactly. Then that cortisol gradually, steadily declines throughout the day, reaching its lowest point in the late evenings so you can sleep.
But that wasn't happening with these patients.
No. In the patients studied with major depressive disorder, the HPA axis was misfiring. The study revealed not only high morning cortisol levels, but abnormally, chronically elevated evening cortisol.
Oh, no.
Their bodies were pumping out stress hormones at the exact biological moment they were supposed to be winding down.
And the researchers made a devastating correlation here, didn't they?
They did.
They found that this higher evening cortisol correlates directly with a psychological condition called anhedonia. They measured this using the SAPS score, the Snaith-Hamilton Pleasure Scale. Can you explain what anhedonia actually feels like? Because it's not just feeling sad, is it?
No, it is much more specific than sadness. Anhedonia is the complete systemic loss of the capacity to experience pleasure.
The complete loss.
Yes. Things that usually bring you joy, a favorite meal, listening to music, talking to a close friend, suddenly elicit absolutely no emotional response.
Wow.
It is a profound emotional flatlining. The data in this study correlated the elevated evening cortisol specifically with an increase in anhedonia and an increase in thoughts of death.
That is chilling.
It's a very difficult state to be in.
The tired, stressed brain doesn't just feel bad. It literally chemically loses its physical capacity to feel joy at night because it is being flooded with an inappropriate cortisol spike.
It creates a perfect catastrophic storm in the evening brain.
Let's synthesize the architecture of the storm, because it's a lot.
Sure.
So your prefrontal cortex is totally depleted of RAM from the 35,000 decisions you made today.
Right.
Because the PFC is offline, your emotional amygdala is highly reactive and unregulated.
Sure.
And simultaneously, your HPA axis is misfiring, flooding your nervous system with cortisol, actively blocking your ability to feel pleasure.
That is the exact physiological state.
Which perfectly sets the stage for my absolute least favorite evening activity.
Let me guess. Rumination.
Rumination, yes. If we are completely devoid of pleasure, high on stress, and lacking logical supervision, the brain is going to spiral.
It's practically guaranteed.
So let me ask a very selfish question that I think everyone listening will relate to.
Go for it.
Why does my brain choose 10:30 p.m. when I'm physically exhausted to suddenly broadcast a vivid, high-definition memory of something incredibly embarrassing I said to a coworker 5 years ago?
It's the worst timing.
Why then? Why not at noon?
If we connect everything we've just discussed to the bigger picture, it all comes back to the collapse of cognitive control. We need to define what rumination actually is first. The Utah Center for Evidence-Based Treatment defines rumination as the recurrent, repetitive dwelling on negative feelings, past mistakes, or catastrophic worst-case scenarios.
It's literally the highlight reel of all your worst moments playing on a loop.
Exactly. And the reason it happens at night is deeply tied to the depletion of your prefrontal cortex.
How so?
When your cognitive control drops, your brain defaults to its most ingrained, least-effort habitual neural loops. The tired brain engages in rumination because it actively tricks itself. It believes it is engaged in deep, important problem solving. It feels productive to the brain.
Oh, wow. It feels like if I just analyze this embarrassing memory from 5 years ago from one more angle, I will somehow fix it or glean some vital truth from it.
But that is the illusion. Actual problem solving is linear. It has a beginning, identifying the problem, a middle, evaluating solutions, and a concluding action.
Yeah.
Rumination is circular. It loops infinitely without ever generating a conclusion or an action plan. You are just spinning the wheels in the mud.
It goes nowhere.
Nowhere. Rumination is essentially a mental habit, a deeply grooved neural pathway that a fatigued prefrontal cortex no longer has the energy to suppress or redirect.
So it's literally like a computer program that gets stuck in an infinite loop.
That's exactly what it is.
It is draining 100% of the CPU, the fan is screaming, the laptop is overheating, but it is never actually going to compute a result.
Yes.
You are expending energy you explicitly do not have to solve a problem that either no longer exists because it happened 5 years ago, or a problem that certainly cannot be solved by staring at the ceiling in the dark.
That is the exact trap of the evening brain.
Okay, we have thoroughly and slightly terrifyingly diagnosed the problem.
We have.
You know what is happening. The evening brain is stripped of willpower by the sheer mathematics of 35,000 daily choices.
Right.
It might be fighting a societal clock that inflicts constant social jet lag. It is flooded with unregulated emotions. Because the prefrontal cortex is empty, it is potentially dealing with a rogue evening cortisol spike, and it is highly vulnerable to falling into the infinite, exhausting loop of habitual rumination.
That's full picture.
So, if I know my biological clock is stacked against me and my PFC is guaranteed to go offline, am I just doomed to spiral every night at 9 p.m.?
Not at all.
How do we actually intervene before the HPA axis floods the brain? How do we protect ourselves from this daily cycle?
This is where we transition from understanding the pathology to implementing actionable, evidence-based strategies for cognitive preservation.
Good. I need strategies.
We can absolutely intervene. The first major strategy outlined across the sources is the concept of decoupling decisions.
Decoupling decisions. Walk me through that.
If we accept the premise that making choices actively drains our cognitive RAM, then we need to become incredibly defensive of that resource.
Right. Protect the battery.
Exactly. We have to stop bleeding energy on low-stakes variables. An article from Thrive Global, integrated into your sources, recommends a 3-step structural approach. Prioritize, schedule, and streamline.
Okay, so practically speaking, you shift your heavy, high-stakes decisions to the morning when your prefrontal cortex is fully powered and your willpower is fresh.
Yes.
You do not try to decide on a career change or analyze your relationship or make a major financial investment at 8:00 p.m.
Never.
You have to establish a hard rule.
Yeah.
No heavy lifting after dark.
You prioritize and schedule the complex variables for the morning, but the third step, streamlining, is where you save the most energy.
Streamlining?
You have to automate the small things to save cognitive fuel for the big things. The classic, famous example of this is Steve Jobs. He wore his signature black turtleneck, blue jeans, and New Balance sneakers every single day.
He wasn't making a fashion statement. He was hacking his decision fatigue.
Exactly. He wore the exact same outfit because it was one less variable his brain had to resolve in the morning. He was streamlining his routine to conserve his cognitive RAM for running Apple. We can apply this to a normal person's Tuesday.
Like meal prepping.
Meal prepping on Sundays does the exact same thing. If you decide on Sunday what you are eating on Thursday night, you completely remove the what's for dinner debate from your exhausted Thursday evening brain.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
You lay out your gym clothes the night before. You create default routines.
You are intentionally shrinking the 35,000 decisions down to maybe 25,000.
But what happens when the tank still empties?
Because it will eventually.
Right. Because even if I meal prep, I'm still to be tired by 10 p.m. If I find myself lying in bed and that infinite loop of rumination starts up about that embarrassing coworker interaction, how do I stop the program from crashing my system?
For that, the sources highlight a specialized clinical approach called rumination-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, or RFDEF-CBT.
Okay, RFCBT.
What makes RFCBT so profoundly different from standard therapy is how it views the rumination itself.
How does it view it?
It treats rumination not as a symptom of underlying depression or anxiety, but as a habit in and of itself.
Oh, that shifts the entire paradigm.
It really does.
Because you break a habit completely differently than you treat a symptom. If it's just a bad habit, like biting your nails, you don't necessarily need to analyze the deep childhood trauma behind the nail biting.
Yeah.
You just need a strategy to stop putting your fingers in your mouth.
Exactly. And the core diagnostic technique in RFCBT is called a functional analysis.
Functional analysis.
Instead of sitting in a therapist's office and talking abstractly about the content of your worries, like analyzing why you said the embarrassing thing to the coworker, the therapist has you re-experience a recent ruminative moment in real time
To do what?
to observe the mechanics of how the habit initiates.
Oh, they act like a mechanic looking at the engine, not a philosopher looking at the meaning of the car.
Yes, perfect analogy. They ask, what was the exact trigger? What room were you in? What were you physically doing right before the neural loop began?
Were you lying in bed? Were you scrolling on your phone?
Exactly. And once you map out how the habit starts, the sources outline a specific intervention called the E6 rule.
The E6 rule. Let's hear it.
The E6 rule is a framework for intercepting the habit. The core pillars involve exploring the experience, experimenting with the experience, exercising, and engaging.
That's a lot of E's.
It is. But the fundamental philosophy here is that breaking a deep neural habit requires actively practicing new behavioral responses in the moment, not just talking about it conceptually.
So you have to actually do something.
Yes,
Yeah.
you literally have to train the brain to take a different physical or mental path when the trigger occurs.
So if my trigger is lying in the dark at 10:30 p.m., I can't just tell myself to stop overthinking.
No, that never works.
Right, I have to give my brain a completely different active task to engage with, which leads perfectly into the final and perhaps most vital preventative strategy.
The shutdown routine.
Yes, the shutdown routine.
The Calm blog provided in your stack outlines 13 distinct tips to unwind, but the overarching non-negotiable philosophy is about creating a clear, definitive psychological boundary.
A boundary between day and night.
Yes, you have to create a ritual that signals to your brain that it is officially off duty.
You literally have to punch the clock for your nervous system.
You do.
You have to tell your brain, the shift is over, put the tools down, we are not computing any more variables today.
And if the brain refuses to put the tools down, they recommend specific active grounding techniques to forcefully pull your cognitive processing out of the theoretical future where it is worrying, or the distant past where it is ruminating.
Go back to now.
Exactly. Lock it into the immediate physical present.
The 5-4-3-2-1 mindfulness technique is the gold standard for this, right?
It is incredibly effective because it hijacks your sensory processing pathways.
How does it work for people who don't know?
When you feel that evening anxiety spiking and the rumination loop starting, you pause and consciously, verbally identify 5 things you can currently see in the room.
Okay. Then 4 things you can physically touch. Then 3 things you can hear. 2 things you can smell. And 1 thing you can taste.
So you are forcing your exhausted prefrontal cortex to process immediate sensory data instead of processing theoretical anxieties.
Yes, it breaks the loop by giving the CPU a mandatory, localized task.
It forcefully grounds you.
It does. And the final critical element of this shutdown routine is heavily limiting screens in the evening.
Ah, the screens. We all know we shouldn't.
But we need to be clear about why. It is not just about the blue light disrupting your melatonin production, although that is a scientifically valid concern.
Right, it's about the cognitive load.
Exactly.
Because scrolling through a social media feed is a rapid-fire, high-intensity exercise in decision-making and stress processing.
Every single second.
Every single email you skim, every news headline you read, every post you scroll past requires your brain to process new information, evaluate its relevance, and generate an emotional reaction. If your problem is decision fatigue and cognitive depletion, opening social media at 9:00 p.m. is like pouring water into a sinking ship.
Wow, that is a stark image.
You are actively flooding an overwhelmed system with hundreds of new micro-variables.
So when we synthesize all of this, the 35,000 choices, the social jet lag, the cortisol spikes, the rumination habits, what does this all mean for you listening right now?
It means a lot.
To me, the most empowering, liberating takeaway from this entire deep dive is that surviving the evening isn't about trying harder to be positive when you feel down.
Definitely not.
It is about structurally protecting your energy during the daylight hours. It's about recognizing that your evening anxiety, that profound dread, is almost entirely a biological and energetic failure, not a moral or personal one.
It is so important to internalize.
You aren't failing at life, your brain is just out of RAM.
And that realization raises a profound question for everyone listening to actively consider tonight.
What's the question?
When you are lying in bed feeling overwhelmed, ask yourself, How much of my evening anxiety is genuinely about the objective state of my life, and how much of it is simply poor energy management?
Oh, that is such a good question.
If your prefrontal cortex is totally exhausted, your HPA axis is misfiring cortisol, and you are deep in decision fatigue, your brain is absolutely going to construct a catastrophic narrative of doom and gloom to justify its physiological state.
Because it wants the story to match the feeling.
Exactly. We have to learn to treat the tired brain with grace rather than judgment.
I love that phrasing.
Mm.
Treat the tired brain with grace. It is doing its best with an empty tank.
It really is.
Let's briefly recap the immense ground we've covered today.
Sure.
We started by looking at the staggering hidden weight of the 35,000 choices we make daily, and how the paradox of choice silently drains our cognitive RAM, leading to profound decision fatigue.
We then explored the chronobiological reality of social jet lag, revealing how evening types are systemically disadvantaged and exhausted by a 9-to-5 world.
Which clinically reduces their measured resilience and optimism.
Yes.
We looked at the exact moment the defenses fall. We saw how perceived insufficient sleep strips the rational prefrontal cortex of its ability to supervise the emotional amygdala, leading to severe emotional dysregulation and reactivity.
We examined the dark neurochemistry of the evening, how a hyperactive HPA axis can flood the depressed brain with cortisol at night,
Driving anhedonia and trapping us in the fruitless, exhausting, infinite loops of habitual rumination.
and finally, we armed you with the tactical defenses.
Decoupling and automating your decisions to hoard your energy.
Treating rumination as a mechanical habit to be broken with RFCVT grounding principles.
And building a rigid, sensory-based shutdown routine to pull your mind back into the present moment.
The biological science is overwhelmingly clear on this. The way you feel at 10:30 p.m. is rarely, if ever, an accurate reflection of reality.
It is merely a reflection of your cognitive depletion.
So the next time you feel overwhelmed, entirely unconfident, or stuck in a negative, spiraling loop at night, do not trust those thoughts.
Your brain is simply compromised by the day's cognitive load. You wouldn't trust the fuel gauge on a car that you know for a fact is broken.
No, you wouldn't.
So do not trust your evening brain when you know the battery's empty.
Just go to sleep.
We'll leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. If our confidence, our optimism, our resilience, and our very personality fluctuate so drastically, based purely on how many mundane decisions we've made and what time the biological clock strikes. Based purely on when the biological clock strikes. Where does our true self actually reside?
That is the million-dollar question.
Are you the pragmatic, inhibited, tired realist of the morning? Or are you the fearless, uninhibited, dreaming night guy?
Or are you something else entirely?
Maybe you're the space in between.